Sup, my homies and hair loss witchers, I've got something a little different for you all today. So, this is a video I've been meaning to do for a long while now, because this is a topic that has really exploded in the past few years, and it is one that has caught me off guard. I'm talking about seed oils, also known as vegetable oils. 20 years ago, nobody really talked about seed oils, and if they did, they were usually thought of as being either benign, or at best, they were seen as healthier alternatives to saturated fats like butter, lard, and tallow. But then, somewhere around the late 2010s to early 2020s, it was decided that no one should consume seed oils anymore, and now people have gone back to consuming saturated fats like butter, coconut oil, and lard.
Seed oils are of the devil.
This shift in public reception towards seed oils greatly reminds me of the gluten-free fad that first began in the early 2010s. Before then, nobody even talked about gluten, and the only time it was ever brought up at all as being an issue was if somebody had celiac disease, which is a condition that affects less than 1% of the population. But then, the book Wheat Belly came out, and all of a sudden, everybody thought they had a gluten intolerance, and we saw an explosion of gluten-free products in every grocery store and restaurant. The gluten-free hype has died down considerably since the start of the 2020s, and in its place, seed oils have become the new perennial nutritional boogeyman that everybody is afraid of. But unlike with gluten, where the hype all began with a shitty book, it's much harder to pinpoint the origin of all the anti-seed oil propaganda we see on social media today. So, I decided to look into my brain and try to remember the earliest thing I could possibly remember seeing or hearing about seed oils being bad, and that's when I remembered this video right here titled, quote, "Are vegetable oils good for us?" unquote. It is a video from a defunct health channel called Underground Wellness that was run by a health influencer named Sean Croxton. Now, the video you see here is actually a re-upload of the original video because I remember the original video came out around 2007, and one day when I went on YouTube at that time, the video showed up in my algorithm and I went ahead and gave it a good watch. In the video, Sean says that vegetable oils or seed oils like canola oil, grapeseed oil, corn oil, etc. are all bad for us and that we should be eating saturated fats like butter, lard, and coconut oil instead. Now, I don't want to bash on Sean here because he talked about this stuff back when this type of content wasn't annoyingly oversaturated all over YouTube. It's possible that Sean no longer holds these views, and I know he's retired from health videos now, so I'd prefer to let him be. But I still think it's important I bring this up because to the best of my knowledge, this was the genesis for what wellness YouTube looks like today. If a video like this were uploaded today, it wouldn't create even a ripple of a reaction since seed oil fear-mongering is the mainstream position for the vast majority of health and wellness influencers on platforms like TikTok and YouTube. But back in 2007, making videos talking about how seed oils are bad and how saturated fat is good for you weren't all that common yet. I have to admit that back then, I wasn't nearly as scientifically literate as I am now, so I found some of his claims compelling, which is why I watched his content. Like, for example, he makes the claim that the reason why vegetable oils are bad for you is because they're inflammatory, and he even attempts to give an explanation as to why. Let's go ahead and listen.
Yo, what's up? I got a really good question today on YouTube, and it was about vegetable oils. Are vegetable oils really good for us? And my emphatic reply is no, they're not good for us. And you probably heard a lot differently from other places, but I'm here to tell you the truth. That's why we call this Underground Wellness, because this information, for some weird reason, has not made it mainstream. All right, even though it's as old as our ancestors, okay, it's still kind of on the down low for some reason. Now, we've been told that we should stop eating saturated fats, okay, to cut the skin off our chicken, to not eat butter, to not eat coconut oil or lard and whatnot, and we've been told to replace those with corn oil and safflower and sesame and soybean and canola oils, all right, polyunsaturated oils. Well, that's completely wrong. All right. If you actually look at our whole heart disease epidemic thing, during this epidemic, vegetable oil consumption has gone up 300%. It's tripled. Saturated fat, the bad fat consumption, has gone down, and at the same time, heart disease has gone up. All right. Want me to rewind that? Vegetable oils gone up, they tripled. Saturated fat has gone down, and heart disease has gone up.
So I remember when I first saw this, I was like, holy shit, that's a great point. I found his arguments convincing because he made the points with such great conviction that he really sounded like he knew what he was talking about. And he was also very charismatic, so it's easy to see how his ideas gained popularity during the Paleolithic era of social media. It was also kind of empowering him to hear him say things like that, because it was all like, yeah, we're sticking it to the medical establishment and we're doing our own research. It was a very populist message that resonated well with a lot of people, including myself. However, if you actually do the scientific research, you quickly find out he's mostly wrong. Even though it is true that consumption of saturated fat has decreased while consumption of seed oils has increased, heart disease has actually gone down over the past 50 years. A lot of that has to do with the use of statin drugs, which were first introduced in 1987 by Merck, which is the same company that invented finasteride. Statins have been a big success story since they have been studied in tens of thousands of patients, with the result that they lower blood LDL cholesterol levels by 25 to 35% and reduce the frequency of heart attacks by 25 to 30%. I recently did a big video going over all the data on statins, and I'll go ahead and link that video below. But it's not just statins that have been shown to reduce heart disease. Linoleic acid is the omega-6 fatty acid that is in many seed oils and which has been demonized by the anti-seed oil establishment. However, it has been shown in numerous randomized control trials and other types of human studies that consumption of omega-6 fatty acids reduces the risk of coronary heart disease. As far as linoleic acid causing inflammation, a systematic review of all the data shows that no, linoleic acid does not increase the concentration of inflammatory markers in the blood. So I thought I should just briefly mention these points because they are talking points that started with the Sean Croxton fellow, but they continue to be used by anti-seed oil conspiracy theorists today. However, even these anti-seed oil social media influencers are now starting to realize that it is very difficult to claim that seed oils are causing heart attacks when the incidence of heart attacks is going down. So they feel that they now have to come up with some other reason to hate on seed oils. Now apparently, the latest trumped up charge against seed oils is that they shrink your brain. But I still thought it was important to mention Sean Croxton and his underground wellness channel because I think he was the very first social media influencer to make the common talking points we hear from virtually every anti-seed oil, crunchy mom, biohacker, internet tough guy, and conspiracy theorist culture warrior on YouTube and TikTok today. Back then, the channel Underground Wellness was appropriately named since Sean Croxton was talking about things that weren't really considered hip or trendy back then. But these days, keto dieting, seed oil fearmongering, and cholesterol denialism represent a multi-billion-dollar industry that involves sales of products like supplements, books, and health courses. So you don't get to call yourself a health rebel anymore just because you eat butter and drink raw milk. These days, it is promoting the scientific consensus that is counterculture. Being pro-establishment is the new anti-establishment. So, what I'm talking about in this video, as well as in my last video on cholesterol, should be considered the modern-day underground wellness. A lot of people don't know just how influential this Sean Croxton guy really was. Most people have never even heard of him, but he inspired some of the most powerful health influencers on social media today who are part of the anti-seed oil movement. I know this because in the video where he announced his retirement from making health-related videos, Jimmy Moore wrote a comment where he said it was him who inspired him to start making content, and Jimmy Moore is the most influential and cherished keto influencer of all time. You ask anyone who has ever followed the keto diet, and they'll tell you that they absolutely adore Jimmy Moore. So, even though Sean Croxton retired from making health-related videos back in 2013, his work was picked up by Jimmy Moore and other cholesterol denialist health influencers as well. And then, over the years, the talking points against seed oils have gotten bolder and weirder, and the anti-seed oil propaganda has gotten so strong that now, even the new head of the Health and Human Services Agency, RFK Jr., is himself an anti-seed oil propagandist and cholesterol denialist, which is especially strange because Donald Trump definitely isn't a cholesterol denialist. He uses a statin drug and he eats fast food virtually every day, which of course is loaded with seed oils.
Seed oils are one of the most unhealthy ingredients that we have in foods.
Virtually every health channel on YouTube is anti-seed oil. I mean, why wouldn't they be? If you want to be popular on YouTube, it helps to tell people what they want to hear. That's the primary reason why people go on social media after all. It's to hear things that affirm their beliefs rather than listening to anything that actually challenges them to think critically. So by far the worst and most popular of these YouTube health channels is this one right here. It's a channel called What I've Learned, also known as Will. It's run by a dude named Joseph Everett. What makes What I've Learned worse than all the others, you may ask? Well, that's simple. It's because Joseph Everett made Rob England famous by inviting him on his channel, where Rob and Joseph falsely claim that hair loss can be stopped by massaging the scalp.
If you talk to dermatologists who are really familiar with feeling people's scalps who have pattern baldness, they'll say that about 80% of the individuals that they see with pattern baldness have really, really tight scalps relative to their non-balding counterparts.
Is that what makes the scalp so shiny?
Is that what makes the scalp so shiny? I scientifically dismantled this video so hard that not even Rob England talks about scalp massages anymore. If you haven't watched that video, please do so. It's linked in the description. But sadly, the damage has already been done, and I can only imagine how many people have now lost their hair as a consequence of watching this video and foolishly thinking that they can save their hair by rubbing their head. But getting back to the channel What I've Learned, the guy who runs it, Joseph Everett, is the most debunked content creator to ever exist on YouTube. Virtually all of his videos have had responses made about them where he gets exposed for regularly misinterpreting research, cherry-picking studies, and inviting guests onto a show who have a clear conflict of interest which he doesn't ever disclose. A lot of the people who have debunked him have been vegan YouTubers like Unnatural Vegan and Mike the Vegan, which isn't all that surprising since most of this guy's content is about promoting the carnivore diet, but even non-vegan YouTubers have called out this guy's bullshit many times. But even looking past this guy's nutrition videos, you can see that he has an anti-scientific ideology in general. I already mentioned his video with Rob England where he falsely claimed that scalp massages can reverse hair loss, but he also has videos claiming that tongue position can influence jaw development and posture, or that you can learn fluent Japanese by just watching anime. He also tries really hard to appeal to the black-pilled incel crowd by having guests on a show like Jordan Peterson. His channel is absolutely huge. He has over 2.3 million subscribers. That's even more subscribers than More Plates, More Dates. So every time he uploads a video, there are hundreds of thousands to millions of people who get exposed to his absolute bullshit. The title of his latest seed oil video is, quote, "The $212 billion food ingredient poisoning our brain," unquote. Oh, it cost a lot of money? I guess that means it must be bad, right? The global annual revenue of the meat industry is over $1 trillion. So does that mean that meat is 5 times as bad as vegetable oils? Are we really going to quantify how bad something is by how much people spend on it? I don't understand what the point of putting a price tag on an industry has to do with what its effects on health are. And I guess seed oils are getting worse for you now too, since the price is going up. He uploaded his first seed oil hit piece video 3 years ago where the price tag was only $100 billion. So I guess that's Bidenflation for you. Thanks, Obama. Now, I want to respond to his latest seed oil video where he claims seed oils are rotting our brains, but I'll address some of the bullshit in his earlier seed oil videos too. In both of his seed oil videos, like in all of his videos that I've watched, he draws conclusions from bogus correlations and he cherry picks data from fringe scientists while he ignores the bulk of the scientific data on each subject he addresses. What he does is he will look at an implausible correlation between the increase in seed oil consumption and changes in IQ levels, and he'll conclude that this is absolute proof that seed oil consumption is rotting our brains. Yet, he'll deny the huge body of research that shows that LDL cholesterol levels reliably predict the risk of heart disease. He'll say, nope, that's just a correlation and it doesn't prove causation. For example, in his first seed oil video, he shows this graph here that shows that vegetable oil consumption has increased at the same time that diabetes and obesity have increased. In the video, he strongly implies that there is a causal connection between seed oil consumption and both diabetes and obesity. Also, what's with this graph here? Does Jason Blaha know that What I've Learned is using his pictures? However, just because two things increase over time does not mean that one causes the other. In the world we live in, almost everything increases over time. For example, this graph here shows that global meat consumption per person has also increased over the same time period that obesity and diabetes have increased. So by his logic, does that mean that diabetes and obesity are caused by eating too much meat? No, you just can't draw any conclusions about causality based on data like that. That's a real correlation does not imply causation fallacy we're talking about here, Chum. Maybe we should look at sugar consumption, which has also increased in the same time period and which might more plausibly be related to obesity and diabetes. The other tactic he often uses is to cherry-pick single studies that favor his biases and ignore the vast majority of studies that don't support his point of view. Or he'll Oil claimed that the real research has been suppressed due to some grand conspiracy by the makers of Crisco, who are working in conjunction with Jewish lizard people from Proxima Centauri or something stupid like that. Unfortunately, since there are so many pay-to-publish medical journals available today, almost any piece of shit can get published, including utter nonsense. Rob England, I'm looking in your direction. But don't worry, pal, I'm not going to pick on you anymore today. This huge problem with the publication of bogus research articles was recently highlighted in an article published by The Atlantic. It tells about how RFK Jr. in his Senate confirmation hearing quoted an article that claimed that vaccines cause autism, which has been thoroughly debunked. The article was published in a peer-reviewed but fringe medical journal whose editorial board includes multiple members who had numerous papers retracted due to their fraudulent nature. The article says, quote, as RFK Jr. made plain during his confirmation hearing, the advocates or foes of virtually any claim can point to published work and say, see, science, unquote. So you can cherry pick your research to try to prove almost anything these days, and that's why What I've Learned and many other self-proclaimed nutrition experts will spend a lot of time hunting down obscure, flawed research studies to support their flawed point of view. What you should be actually doing, if you want to do quality research that is look at systemic review articles and meta-analyses, because those type of publications take into account all the data, and not just the studies that fit your confirmation bias. That's why those types of studies are at the very top of the medical evidence pyramid. But ultimately, science doesn't really matter to What I've Learned because he's not interested in telling you the truth. He just wants you to believe his bullshit by any means possible, and he'll only defer to science when it suits his interests. So, let's go over the science he presents in his latest seed oil video and debunk his claims that seed oils rot your brain.
What if a $200 billion food ingredient is shrinking our brains and making us dumber?
Or the much better question, what if there was a YouTube channel making us dumber and shrinking our brains?
In the 1930s, a Polish farmer came to Canada with a plant that has seeds that produce an oil that was great for lubricating machinery. Canada produced tons of this stuff to lubricate ship engines during World War II. But after World War II, they didn't need all that lubricant anymore, and were stuck with all these seed-producing plants. Also, they had tons of machinery left over.
I think What I've Learned is bringing this up just because he wants his viewers to think, ew, it used to power machines and engines and we're supposed to eat it? Gross! Okay, throughout history, oil has been used for lubrication as well as a source of energy. That's true not only for seed oil, but also for What I've Learned's preferred food sources, namely lard and beef tallow, which were both used as popular lubricants in the 19th century. The only reason vegetable oils were used as lubricants in World War II was due to petroleum shortages, and plant oils were a cheap alternative. So seed oils helped us win the war against fascism in World War II, but this What I've Learned guy seems to think that's a negative thing. So if What I've Learned had his way, we'd all be speaking German or Japanese right now, but maybe that's what this guy would want. I mean, he does live in Japan for some reason, even though he's clearly an American or possibly Canadian. Maybe he's just a weeaboo. According to What I've Learned, after the war there was an excess of seed oils, so this caused some nefarious, money-grubbing capitalist conmen to pass this seed oil off as cooking oil to unsuspecting citizens. He makes it sound like people were being asked to drink surplus petroleum oil rather than a plant extract. But repurposing items used in the war was not a bad thing. After all, the Allies didn't just throw away the decoding equipment that Alan Turing used to decipher Nazi transmissions during the war. No, it was repurposed and used to develop computers that we all benefit from today. That's just the nature of progress. As terrible as wars are, they often stimulate new discoveries and innovations. The fact that we figured out how to make edible oil more efficiently and cheaply without the use of animals is a good thing. Just because something is new doesn't mean it's bad. What I've learned about What I've Learned is that he's a Luddite.
Because to produce just a tablespoon of oil, you need 70,000 seeds.
Okay, cool story, bro. So do you have an actual point? What he's trying to imply here is that since you're using a lot of seeds, you are therefore using a lot of resources, and therefore seed oils like canola oil are inefficient. But let's examine that idea and compare it to what he promotes. Let's break down the actual metrics of canola oil production. Each acre of canola plants will produce 30 to 40 bushels of canola seed, and each bushel can be made into 11 liters of canola oil. So that's about 400 liters of canola oil per per acre. Of course, canola oil isn't the only seed oil. There's also corn oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, sesame oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, flaxseed oil, and many others as well. Since all these oils come from plants, they are completely renewable resources, so the implication that the production of these oils is wasteful is just flat out wrong. Furthermore, we get a lot of utility from the seeds even after they've been crushed and turned into oil. Canola meal is an excellent source of protein, and it is used to feed livestock as well as create pet food. So ironically, all the meat that What I've Learned loves to shove in his pudgy gob is made affordable thanks to the production of canola oil, whose byproducts help lower the price of meat. Yet, carnivore dieters like him hate seed oils, but if it weren't for seed oils, he probably wouldn't be able to afford living in Japan where he can use sticks of meat as props for his videos.
To get this tiny amount of oil, they ran the seeds through a long industrial process.
With high pressure, forcing out the oil to a second extraction. 70-minute wash with a solvent. They wash the oil with sodium hydroxide. They bleach it, then use a steam injection heating process to remove the canola odor.
And they then sold it as cooking oil for humans.
Healthy cooking with new Mazola Right blend.
Oh, it's not natural, you're saying? That must mean it's bad. I guess he's just showing us the process of producing seed oils and hoping that we'll think it's gross, which is pretty strange because doesn't this guy promote the carnivore diet? Do I really need to show you guys what is involved in the process of turning a living being into a slab of muscle packaged in plastic? Is there anything natural about cramming billions of animals into tiny warehouses where they spend their entire lives in a dark prison where they're up to their elbows in their own shit and tortured on a daily basis only to have their throats slit at the very end? Now, I'm not saying this to gross anyone out or even to promote veganism necessarily, but it is the height of hypocrisy for someone like Joseph who promotes the carnivore diet to show a seed oil production as if it's some gross process, considering how disgusting the process is that allows him to lead his unethical lifestyle.
Canola oil is now the most commonly used cooking oil today. You probably have it in your pantry.
Seed oils.
Seed oils.
The most unhealthy ingredients that we have.
Seed oils are of the devil. And when you want to stop using them, you can't. They're in every food.
Oh, they're in every food, you say? So when I go to the produce section at Whole Foods, is canola oil in the fresh potatoes, celery, and beetroot that I buy? What he actually means is that canola oil is a common ingredient specifically in processed foods. Clearly, a lot of processed foods are not good for you. Everybody knows that. But the reason why they're bad for you is not because of the small amount of oil that they contain. It's because processed foods are usually very calorically dense. They're high in sugar and sodium, and they have little nutritional value proportionate to the amount of calories found in them. If you were to replace the canola oil in these products with lard or fish oil, it would not make them any healthier because all the other bad shit would still be in them, so this is a completely worthless argument. Nobody is claiming that processed foods are good for you.
In 1865, we ate 0 grams of vegetable oil.
What is bullshit, Alex? Vegetable oil has been used for thousands of years. In fact, people first started consuming seed oils at least 5,000 years ago in the form of sesame oil. Also, olive oil is a vegetable oil that has been consumed for even longer, at least 6,000 years. So contrary to what this lard brain is saying, seed oils have been a common part of the human diet throughout all of history.
But now the average American consumes 720 of the calories in their diet from these highly processed oils every day.
Okay, so if he were making this video about how we eat too many calories, I would agree with him 100%, but he's not. He's saying it's seed oils that are the big problem. So, does he think that if we were to replace these 720 calories per day of vegetable oil with butter or lard, that would somehow solve all of our problems? It wouldn't, because you'd just be replacing unsaturated fats with saturated fats that promote heart disease. So you'd only be making things worse. And yes, I know all the cholesterol deniers who are watching this are probably really triggered by me saying this, but I already did a whole video going over cholesterol, which is linked below. But whatever the case, it's clear that people are eating more fat than what's recommended by the American Heart Association, which is less than 30% of their total calories. So, if you're going to blame health problems on diet, it isn't that people are eating seed oils, it's just that they're consuming too many calories in general, including calories from fat, and one look at Jason Blaha makes it hard to argue against that.
Now, vegetable oils, also called seed oils, contain a very specific type of fat that for 99% of human history, we didn't eat that much of. And the human brain brain is mostly made of fat. It's about 60% fat.
Except for your brain, Joseph, which is 90% fat and 10% bubblegum. The fact that 60% of other people's brain is made of fat seems irrelevant, but he's bringing this up as a prelude to make a point that eating the wrong types of fat will shrink your brain. Not that this guy's brain could get much smaller, but let's let him continue bloviating anyways.
So the question is, could eating a ton of all this processed seed oil fat be affecting our brain and our intelligence?
We eliminated Alzheimer's disease by eliminating vegetable oil, corn oil, and soy oil from the animal's diet and putting in large doses of vitamin E and selenium.
The guy he just showed you is named Dr. Joel Wallach, and he's the Eric Berg of the 1990s. To his credit, unlike Mr. Berg, Dr. Joel Wallach actually is a real doctor. He's a doctor of veterinary medicine, but based on the pseudoscientific dribble he's published, I wouldn't even let my cat see this guy. He is an absolute quack. He's a con man and he's a snake oil salesman. He runs a bullshit supplement company called Youngevity, which is a stupid portmanteau of young and longevity, and it sells a bunch of overpriced vitamins and minerals as well as phytochemical extracts, so his products kind of remind me of other scams like Athletic Greens. He is notorious for falsely claiming that Alzheimer's disease only started occurring 40 years ago, and that Alzheimer's is caused by low cholesterol diets and cholesterol-lowering drugs like statins. What a bunch of utter nonsense. Alzheimer's disease was first reported over a century ago, long before statins were invented, and it's likely it's existed for all of human history. But considering just how devastating and debilitating Alzheimer's disease is, it's extremely offensive to hear him promote pseudoscientific lies about this condition while promoting a worthless supplement company. In fact, when he says that low cholesterol causes Alzheimer's disease, the opposite is actually true. A meta-analysis of 8 clinical trials, including over 23,000 subjects, showed that taking statin drugs that lower cholesterol levels was associated with a 29% lower long-term risk of developing dementia versus subjects taking a placebo. Now, Alzheimer's disease isn't the point of this video, but I did still want to bring this up just to show you guys that what I've learned sources are completely unreliable and shady, but I'll quote anyone just so long as they promote his agenda because he's dishonest.
By the way, if you're interested in reducing the negative health effects of these seed oils, make sure and watch the video to the end because I've got a free gift for you.
I hate to say this, Chooms, but I don't think this free gift is going to be worth it, unless it's a link that unsubscribes you from his channel.
Now, let's rewind a little bit.
Damage to children, like brain damage, learning disabilities.
Back in 1979, researchers were shocked to see a notable decrease in the average IQ of children in Massachusetts. Not only were these kids slower at learning, but something was affecting their brain to where they were more distractible, hyperactive, impulsive, and easily frustrated. In the 1920s, Thomas Midgley had just made a new product for the automotive industry that he projected would make billions of dollars.
Modern gasoline gives the greater performance.
That product was tetraethyl lead, which was used to make leaded gasoline.
Leaded gasoline was far more profitable.
From the 1920s, cars all over the country were pumping the poisonous lead into the air every day.
Mounting medical evidence that lead is damaging children's brains.
This dramatic change in the air led to a decline in the IQ of children. Luckily, our brains are now safe from this because leaded gasoline was phased out starting in 1973.
2 years from now, cut lead by 91%.
So then what happened after 1973?
IQ scores seem to be drifting up, but there's also evidence that the effect is slowing down and possibly reversing.
Oh boy.
So what he's saying about leaded gasoline is true. Leaded gasoline is an abomination, and that's why when you pump your gas, you use unleaded gasoline. Well, except for me, because I drive an electric car. But the problem here is that what I've learned is bringing this up to make a fallacious comparison to seed oils. Lead is a known potent neurotoxin, and its toxicity has been known for thousands of years. So it was really stupid to put lead in gasoline to begin with, but this story is a good argument for government regulation of industry in general, but it has nothing to do with seed oils. Seed oils are not toxins, so this is just another way to overly dramatize his fear-mongering about seed oils, but it is a completely invalid comparison.
In 2018, Norwegian researchers revealed data that IQ scores started to slightly decrease for men born after 1975. The lead author, Ole Roseberg, says that similar studies in Denmark, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Finland, and Estonia all found the same thing, a trend of decreasing IQ scores.
So actually, using What I've Learned's own graph featuring Jason Blaha, seed oil consumption started rising in the 1910s to 1920s, and then it really took off in the 1960s after the American Heart Association started recommending vegetable oils. Now at the same time, IQ scores have actually risen tremendously by 30 points, so clearly seed oil consumption increases IQ scores. I'm being facetious, of course, because this is just a correlation. However, it is a correlation that What I've Learned is completely ignoring, while at the same time, he is saying that in recent years, IQ scores have started to drop off, and he's going to be blaming that on seed oils. So, here's the graph from the Norwegian study that I briefly put up on the screen. You should pay attention to the fact that what's being plotted here is the birth year of the people taking the IQ test, not the year of the testing. These IQ tests were done during military conscription, so the actual tests were at least 18 years after the birth, putting most of the decline in the 21st century. Also notice that the y-axis of these graphs is in IQ points, with people born in 1975 taken as the 0 point. So, looking at the left-hand graph and the family drop in IQ, the drop is only about 2 points over at least 20 years. The study concludes from these changes in IQ scores within families that they are due to environmental and not genetic factors. However, unlike What I've Learned, these researchers do not blame this drop in IQ scores on seed oils. They say the changes are due to, quote, changes in educational exposure or quality, changing media exposure, worsening nutrition or health, and social spillovers from increased immigration, unquote. If we don't just cherry pick one study like Joseph does and look at a meta-analysis of IQ data from America, IQ scores rose an average of 2.93 points per decade between 1951 and 2010. However, if we look at the most recent American data, there was a dip in IQ scores that was seen between 2006 and 2018. So what happened exactly during those years that could possibly explain why people have gotten dumber? The answer? Social media brain rot, of course, especially from channels like What I've Learned. Actually, there's one section of the IQ test where scores went up recently, and that area was three-dimensional reasoning. So that's strong evidence that playing video games are good for you and make you smarter, especially games like Witcher 3, which helped inspire this channel. Even the authors of the study proposed that access to digital devices might be lowering IQ levels, and they even think that video game playing might be improving three-dimensional intelligence. So, the way to make Americans smarter is to have them play more Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk and spend less time watching channels like What I've Learned. But literally none of these studies on IQ are blaming any of the recent changes on seed oils. Not a single one. If Joseph Everett is going to blame seed oils for the recent slight drop in IQ scores, then he should also credit them for the multi-decades-long rise in IQ that correlates perfectly with our increased consumption of seed oils. You can see this here in Joseph's Jason Blaha graph, where I've superimposed the IQ score graph. Now, I don't actually believe seed oils increase or decrease IQ, but this is another example of Joseph cherry-picking data to support his agenda. He calls himself What I've Learned, but what he really should call himself is What I Wish Were True.
Now, Rosenberg points out that someone might criticize his finding, saying that because IQ has a lot to do with genetics, maybe it's just more dumb people are having more kids. But he says no, it has to be environmental factors, because they found the same downward trend in IQ within families.
I'm sure there are both genetic and environmental factors contributing to lower IQ levels in humans, but why would it be seed oils? Especially since we already established earlier that IQ scores rose tremendously during the majority of time seed oils have been available and only started dropping once social media became prevalent, though the drop is not as dramatic as Joseph makes it out to be. It's only 2 points after all, and none of these studies are claiming that the environmental factor affecting IQ is seed oils. It's What I've Learned's channel that is making people stupider, not seed oils.
Dr. Michael Crawford, director of the Institute of Brain Chemistry and Human Nutrition, says that based on current trends, we are heading for an idiocracy.
Your channel has over 2 million subscribers. We're already there, Joseph, thanks to you.
There are tons of factors to IQ, but evidence is piling up that a different, cheap, and profitable invention is now polluting our brains.
What have you got me into this time, Joseph?
This completely new and unnatural product has created a $212 billion industry, and it's not in the air, but our food supply. Dr. Michael Crawford's data suggests that a new, specific type of fat added to the global food supply may be de-evolving our brains.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points and may God have mercy on your soul.
Now, that's a huge claim. So let's take a look at what makes our brains so big and smart in the first place.
So he's about to launch into a tirade about how seed oils are shrinking our brains, but again, let me remind you, chums, that IQ rates have been rising for the vast majority of time that seed oils have been popular. So if seed oils only started shrinking our brains 12 years ago, how come they didn't shrink the brains of people in the 1920s up to the 2000s? None of this shit makes any sense, but let's let him continue.
However, something happened around 2 million years ago. Brain size started mysteriously increasing way faster, ending up with humans having massive brains way ahead of schedule.
There was a schedule, you say? Oh, wait a minute. I remember what happened 2 million years ago to make our brains grow.
So, why did this happen? And why are cetaceans like dolphins, orcas, and whales so smart? And why are rhinos, cows, and horses so dumb?
First of all, rhinos, horses, and cows aren't dumb, but Joseph Everett is. Rhinos have a complex nervous system and will answer to their names. They have advanced memory, which allows them to remember areas which are dangerous so they can avoid them and recall locations which have food, water, and shelter for them. They are also capable of emotion and empathy towards other beings, including humans. Horses have advanced learning capabilities, and research has shown that horses can decipher situations in their brains and make strategic decisions. Cows, an animal that Joseph abuses and breastfeeds from on a daily basis, are also highly intelligent animals. They have puzzle-solving capabilities, long-term memory, facial recognition, and they can experience complex emotions like happiness, fear, and grief. Some researchers even suggest that cows may have greater cognition than even dogs, which we all know are highly intelligent animals capable of learning. For example, cows perform better than dogs at navigating mazes, and like dogs, cows are capable of recognizing human faces and also showing affection towards human beings. Of course, I don't expect a sociopath like Joseph to care about animals, since to justify his carnivore diet, he doesn't want to accept the fact that the animals he eats are conscious, intelligent beings.
One theory is that early humans essentially figured out how to cook wild potatoes, tubers, which gave them plenty of calories to fuel their big, energy-hungry brains. The human brain takes up a whole 20 to 25% of our calories, so an efficient source of calories was very important. Except this doesn't make that much sense because wild potatoes don't have any of the important nutrients the brain needs to grow. They're just calories.
No important nutrients in potatoes, you say? Only someone with the brain of a potato would think that. What about B vitamins, beta-carotene, potassium, manganese, vitamin C, copper? There is even a decent amount of protein in potatoes. This guy is treating a highly nutritious food like it's an empty source of calories like a soft drink or something, and nothing could be further from the truth. If Joseph weren't such a couch potato with his research, then he'd know very well that all potatoes have lots of vitamins and minerals in them, and there are people who have lived off of nothing but potatoes for months at a time. So this slander against tubers has got to stop.
Hunting would be a much better reason for why our brains grew. Animal meat and organs would provide all sorts of critical nutrients for the brain, and animal fat would provide tons of calories. Primates figuring out how to get meat was the most obvious explanation for evolving the human brain.
So he's trying to build up a case here that the reason why prehistoric humans developed big brains was because they ate meat. Now, there's no doubt that primitive people ate meat, and the need to hunt and make weapons and tools to kill animals helped humans evolve a larger brain size. But eating meat is not a prerequisite for intelligence. If eating meat was necessary for brains to grow, then how come some of the most intelligent animals on the planet are either completely herbivorous or mostly herbivorous? Elephants are herbivores, but they have the largest brain of any terrestrial animal. They are so smart that they can even learn how to paint. Not to mention there are other intelligent primate species like gorillas who almost exclusively eat plants. Coco the gorilla mastered sign language and could communicate using over 1,000 different signs. So whatever role hunting and gathering played in human evolution, eating meat isn't necessary for intelligence.
However, zoologist Dr. Michael Crawford thought that there was another piece to the puzzle. In the 1980s, he decided to investigate what types of fat there were in the bodies and brains of various types of animals. He noted that high levels of two fats helped make the brain grow, and there was a third fat that seemed to be bad for brain growth. The two fats that made the brain grow and therefore were very important for the evolution of the brain are arachidonic acid, AA, and docosahexaenoic acid, DHA. Humans could get plenty of AA by hunting various land animals, but land animals aren't that great of a source of DHA. You can get a good amount of DHA from the brains and eyes of animals, but early humans would have had to crack open a ton of animal skulls to get a steady supply of DHA.
Okay, Here what I've learned really starts to go off the rails, because he and his buddy Dr. Michael Crawford decided that evolution alone was not enough to explain the size of the human brain. So he starts talking about specific fatty acids. One is arachidonic acid, also known as AA, which is an omega-6 fatty acid, and the other is docosahexaenoic acid, aka DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid. Now, why they're called omega-6 or omega-3 fatty acids depends on some features of these molecules that relate to their chemistry, but that's not all that important. Anyways, although both AA and DHA are found in animal meat and fish, they can also be synthesized in the body by conversion of linoleic acid to AA and conversion of alpha-linoleic acid to DHA, and both linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid easily are available in a plant-based diet. So, Joseph claims that to get enough DHA from hunting, you'd have to eat animal brains and eyeballs, which is not very practical or very appetizing for most people.
DHA is most important during development of the brain.
Crawford argues that the real reason human brains evolved was because early humans found a more simple way to get the special DHA. Now, primates like humans and monkeys have enzymes that allow them to make a very small amount of DHA from a fat in plant foods. So to get a lot of DHA, you can't make it, you have to eat it. Now, the average monkey diet does not naturally contain much DHA. So what happens if you give monkeys DHA? A 2014 paper outlines the work of some dedicated researchers at the University of California, Davis, who took some rhesus monkeys and fed them a diet high in DHA for their entire lifespan, about 17 to 19 years. After all this time, they put the monkeys in a brain scanner to see if anything was different. They found that compared to the other monkeys, the brains of the monkeys on the unnaturally high DHA diet had highly connected and well-organized neural networks which in some ways, quote, resembled the healthy human brain. That is, some aspects of their brains started to look more like a human brain.
Joseph quotes a monkey study that supports the idea that DHA is important for brain development by comparing brain MRI scans of monkeys on a low DHA diet versus a high DHA diet. There is no doubt that DHA is important for brain development, which is why pregnant women are often prescribed DHA supplements and why breast milk and infant formula contains DHA. But DHA is not exclusively sourced from animals. It is found in high quantities in seaweed and algae. It can also be synthesized from the alpha-linoleic acid that is present in soybeans, flax seeds, walnuts, chia seeds, and hemp seeds. Also, the findings in the animal studies that Joseph mentions may not reflect the situation in human beings. This study examined all the evidence on whether or not DHA deficiencies exist in humans. The study found that vegans and vegetarians on a low alpha-linoleic and high linoleic acid diet had lower DHA levels in the blood and tissues, but they had normal DHA levels in the adipose tissue and in breast milk. They had no increases in a specific marker of DHA deficiency in the brain, so there was no evidence of DHA deficiency in the brains of vegans or vegetarians. So if Joseph's theory that primitive human brains grew because of dietary DHA is correct, let's see where they got it from.
The best source of DHA is seafood. Fish, shellfish, crustaceans, algae. These also have all kinds of important brain nutrients like protein, vitamin A, zinc, choline, iodine, selenium, vitamin B12, and so on, but they would be the best source of DHA. Michael Crawford says it would be so easy and safe to just walk along the coastline and gather tons of nutrient-dense food versus having to hunt land animals.
This anthropological theory doesn't make any sense. It's not like all early human beings lived right next to the seashore and had access to aquatic animals for nutrition. It's not like cavemen were able to go to Red Lobster and order salmon. Like I already mentioned, sea vegetables like seaweed and algae are very good sources of DHA. That's where fish get their omega-3s from after all, and if ancient humans ate fish, they definitely ate seaweed too, especially since it was probably easier to harvest seaweed than catch fish. So if we are to speculate like Joseph is doing here, it's much more probable that eating sea vegetables help grow our brains more than eating fish.
Professor Stephen Cunnane of Toronto University agrees, saying a shore-based diet was essential for the evolution of human brains.
Again, this is just speculation. Most humans did not live on the seashore, and saying fish grew our brains doesn't make any sense because fishing requires a certain degree of intelligence already. Fish didn't just swim into our mouths after all. Ancient people had to create things like nets, traps, and probably even boats before they could effectively catch fish. So, what's much more likely here is that humans subsisted off of sea vegetables, since sea vegetables don't require any skill or intelligence to harvest. They literally wash up on the shore for Pete's sake, and they beg to be eaten. And frankly, they're absolutely delicious, which is why seaweed is commonly consumed even today amongst many cultures. If this hypothesis that ancient humans needed to eat fish as a source of DHA to grow their brains is even true, which it isn't of course, then it is probably seaweed that grew our brains to the point where we became smart enough to catch fish. After all, sea vegetables have all this precious DHA that Joseph and this Dr. Crawford guy and his buddy Dr. Kinane think are so important for our brains. So, if we were stupid before we consumed DHA, we wouldn't have been smart enough to figure out how to effectively capture fish. Especially since a lot of fish species are inedible or even poisonous, so it likely took a lot of trial and error before we figured out how to safely eat them. And that's even assuming this hypothesis is true, which is far from proven, because like I said, humans are plenty capable of synthesizing DHA from ALA sources of omega-3s, which are abundantly found in plants. There is even evidence that the lower your DHA intake, the greater your conversion of ALA to DHA is to make up for it. This study here found evidence of this increased conversion of ALA into DHA in non-fish eaters versus fish eaters. However, there's something much more important I have to talk about here, because there's something very fundamentally flawed with Joseph's argument. Joseph Everett believes that if our diet grew our brains, then that trait would be passed along to our descendants, and therefore the reason we have big brains is because our ancestors ate things which made our brains bigger. That's not how evolution works. What Joseph is describing is an example of Lamarckian evolution. Lamarckian evolution, for those who don't know, is a debunked theory of evolution that predates Darwinism. What proponents of Lamarckian evolution believed is that behaviors we engage in throughout our life get passed on to our descendants. So for example, if someone spends much of their life working out and getting strong, then their descendants will inherit this strength and they will also be strong. Of course, we now know that evolution is actually due to natural selection. Acquired characteristics are not passed along to our offspring. So, Joseph is saying that primitive people ate fish and the DHA in the fish made their brains larger, and this trait was passed along to their descendants. That would be the explanation based on Lamarckian evolution, but that's completely false. Darwin's explanation would be that people who were born with larger brains due to random mutations would have a survival advantage, and so their offspring would inherit this advantage so that over time brains in general would get bigger. So, what's likely here is that our ancestors with bigger brains who were more skilled at fishing and hunting would be more likely to survive, and that would be the reason for this gradual increase in our brain size over the generations. It would have nothing at all to do with how much DHA they ate, because even if DHA could grow brains, the larger brain size would not be passed along to their offspring. So this is a tremendous fundamental flaw in Joseph's reasoning, and he even claims that our brains are devolving because of seed oil consumption, which would be another example of Lamarckian evolution and a complete misunderstanding of how evolution works. This guy didn't even pass 6th grade biology.
One study from 2020 found that breastfeeding mothers who ate more omega-3 fats like DHA tended to have babies with bigger brains. Specifically, the frontal cortex got bigger. The frontal cortex controls uniquely human things like long-term goal planning, decision-making, and problem-solving.
So this is an extremely poorly designed study. The study looked at 1-month-old infants of 92 women, and the study looked at the diets of the women. However, the infants were not consistently breastfed. Some of the babies were fed using infant formula, and some of the babies had a combination of breastfeeding and infant formula. Clearly, in a baby who is receiving infant formula, we know there isn't going to be any relation between a woman's diet and her baby's diet. The study was not a prospective controlled study, and it used questionnaires to determine each mother's diet. Actual amounts of DHA, omega-3s, and omega-6 in the blood or in the diet were not measured in this study. So, we don't actually know what the mother's real diets were or what the source of the omega-3 fatty acids were. We don't know if the mothers were eating fish, sheep brain, seaweed, or just junk food. What is used in the study is just calculated levels of omega-3 and omega-6s based on diet questionnaires and calculations based on how many grams of omega-3s and omega-6s are in an average portion size. So this is just an extremely poorly designed study and it should be discarded. The only reason why What I've Learned posted it is because the conclusions told him something he wanted to hear, so he flashes it on screen like it's gospel and he doesn't bother to break down any of the methodology or mention any of the study's limitations. The only criteria What I've Learned uses for what constitutes a good study is whether or not it confirms his biases, and so long as it does, he'll disregard any study limitations.
Other studies suggest shrinkage of the prefrontal cortex from a DHA deficient diet. Several studies have found that DHA improves attention, learning, memory, and reduces ADHD symptoms in children.
Well, Joseph's video can certainly cause shrinkage of prefrontal cortex, so I hope I still have the intelligence to finish this video. So, this study he flashes on the screen is this one here. This study and other studies that what I've learned doesn't mention show that DHA deficiencies are associated with mood disorders and poor brain function, and increasing DHA by either diet or supplements can improve brain function. I've reviewed the studies, and I do think that DHA is an important omega-3 fatty acid for brain health, but this has nothing at all to do with seed oils being bad for you. Seed oils don't have DHA, but neither do lard or beef tallow, and I don't see Joseph railing against those fats. Fish oil has DHA, but the only reason it does is because fish eat sea plants and algae. That's because sea vegetables are the ultimate source of DHA in our diets, not fish. Apart from that, DHA is also synthesized from ALA, which is present in canola oil, which is the most commonly consumed seed oil in the world. So, if you're on a vegetarian or vegan diet, then you should at least consider consuming seaweed or algae, but if you don't do that, then you might benefit from taking a DHA supplement, because even though your body can convert ALA into DHA, you might be able to get more optimal levels through supplementation or by eating sea vegetables.
Of course, those geniuses of the sea, dolphins and other cetaceans, are getting tons of the brain-evolving DHA from a diet that is mostly raw fish. You might say, okay, well, dolphins eat tons of fish. Why don't they just keep getting smarter and smarter? Why aren't they even smarter than humans? Researchers say that might just be simply because smarter brains, packed with more neurons, use tons of energy and oxygen. If the dolphin's brains guzzles up more oxygen, then they can't dive as long.
Okay, so once again, Joseph is promoting Lamarckian evolution. He's claiming that dolphin brains evolved because of what they ate. There is no such thing as a food that causes evolution. That's ridiculous. That's like saying evolution is caused by mysterious alien monoliths. He's claiming that dolphins eat so much DHA that they should be as smart as humans, but their excuse for not evolving human-sized brain is that they have to dive and need to preserve oxygen. I mean, if that were true, then why doesn't it apply to bears? Bears eat a lot of fish, and they don't have to go diving. In fact, they spend a good portion of their lives barely using any energy at all, since they hibernate for months at a time. So why aren't they smarter than humans or even dolphins? I mean, I'm practically asking this question rhetorically now, because the idea that DHA is some magical substance that makes brains evolve to be smarter is completely bogus, and it just sounds like this guy is grasping for straws to explain the massive gasp in his logic. Evolution is not driven by diet. Animals evolved to survive in their environment, and dolphins are as smart as they need to be in order to survive. Evolution is caused by changes in the environment that cause creatures to adapt to the new environment. Humans likely developed a larger brain because they competed with other human species like Neanderthals, who were also very intelligent and capable of things like tool use and language. So, in our case, it was our big brain that we needed in order to have a competitive advantage over other intelligent human species. It's not like Neanderthals were eating less fish than us. Evolution is not dictated through behaviors like diet. It's determined by natural selection. But hold the presses, chooms. Things are about to get so stupid and weird that even Ray Pete himself would be embarrassed.
Speaking of diving, our quest for DHA-rich seafood might explain why our noses are so weird. There's this old controversial theory called the aquatic ape theory that says that humans evolved from an ancestor that adapted to life near bodies of water. Several aspects of our body seem more adapted for the water. For example, we don't have hair on our bodies, which would make it easier to swim.
Okay, just because you use Nair to remove all of your body hair so you feel all silky smooth doesn't mean that all humans don't have body hair. I found this picture in literally about 4 seconds. Body hair on humans is very common.
And we have a layer of fat under our skin, unlike other primates, which would help us float in water. Further, this may have something to do with why we started walking upright. Monkeys can walk on 2 feet, but they prefer not to, unless they are wading through the water. Now, most anthropologists completely reject this aquatic ape theory, but whether we had a semi-aquatic ancestor or not, humans are very good at diving.
Most anthropologists consider the aquatic ape theory to be pure pseudoscience, as we'll soon see, but no theory is too ridiculous if it supports what I've learned's point of view.
The human spleen, for example, is larger than in other primates, and it acts as a reservoir of oxygen-carrying red blood cells, which allows us to hold our breath for longer. The Bajau people near the Philippines live a sea nomad type of lifestyle, where they spend hours a day diving for all kinds of DHA-rich seafood like shellfish, shrimp, crab, fish, octopus, sea urchin, and squid. And their genetics gift them with an abnormally large spleen, which is thought to be why some Bajau can hold their breath for over 10 minutes.
So the population of people he brought up, the Bajau people, are indeed very well adapted to swimming and diving and can hold their breath for an extraordinarily long period of time. They do have larger spleens too, but all this has absolutely nothing to do with their diet. This is another example of natural selection we're talking about here, chums. We know this because the specific genes involved in these aquatic adaptations have been identified amongst the Bajau people, and the explanation for these adaptations is merely that these traits allow these people to survive better in their environment. Another important factor is aerobic conditioning. Many of these people have likely been training how to swim and hold their breath since they were children, and as a result of that, they just have better cardiovascular endurance than most people. Even someone who isn't a Bajau could train themselves to hold their breath longer while swimming through aerobic training. Conversely, a Bajau person who lives a sedentary lifestyle would probably not be able to hold their breath very long. So, the existence of these people does not support the aquatic ape theory or the theory that diet causes evolutionary changes. This is just Joseph trying to promote the Lamarckian evolution theory once again, which is of course completely bullshit.
Now, another interesting aspect of humans is our protruding noses. Unlike monkeys' flat noses, human noses are better at preventing water from getting in the nasal cavity when we swim or dive. Most monkeys are not good swimmers, but the proboscis monkeys are, and they happen to have these big protruding noses.
This is yet another bogus theory from Joseph. Most biologists think that the shape of our nose is related to climate, which is why people of European descent have longer, narrower noses to adapt to cold air, while people living in tropical climates have flatter noses. There is a really good article from Scientific American that I'll link below, and I highly encourage you all to read it because it completely debunks the aquatic ape theory. Just to highlight some of the points it makes though, it says that most semi-aquatic animals are actually very hairy, like otters and seals, that the fat distribution in humans is more likely to be related to sexual selection, that voluntary breath control is more likely related to speech than breath holding, that a marine diet was a late development in our evolution, and that many of our ancestors lived in forests and did not have access to marine life at all. Also, compared to other animals, humans aren't particularly good at swimming. And what I just said is barely scratching at the surface here. It is spectacular just how wrong the aquatic ape theory is. So again, I highly encourage everyone to check out this article.
As of 2019, Japan is #1 in the world for IQ, with an IQ of 106. That's a full 9 points higher than the United States IQ of 97. Of course, there are all kinds of different factors to IQ, but Japan does have a DHA-rich food culture that includes plenty of seaweed and fresh seafood. They eat about twice as much fish as Americans. A traditional Japanese breakfast is white rice, fermented soybeans, miso soup with seaweed, roasted fish, and more dry seaweed. Of course, you can find all kinds of fish at Japanese supermarkets and restaurants, but you can even get fish rice balls or roasted fish at a convenience store.
This is some of the most egregious cherry picking of data I have ever seen. It is true that Japan has both a high average IQ and a high amount of fish consumption, but did you know there are nations that have even more fish consumption than Japan, but a lower average IQ? For example, your average Portuguese citizen consumes about 13 more kilograms of fish annually compared to a Japanese citizen, yet the average IQ of a Portuguese person is 93, while in Japan, the average IQ is 106. Or you can even pick a country that has nearly the exact same fish consumption as Japan, like Cambodia, and they have an average IQ of 97, 9 points lower than your average Japanese person. So, is it the fish consumption that gives Japanese people such a high IQ, or is it the huge emphasis the Japanese government and Japanese people put on public education? Fortunately, you don't have to be Japanese to know that Joseph's point is stupid. Also, Japanese people are no strangers to the much maligned seed oils that apparently are making everybody stupider. In fact, their culture may have been one of the very first human civilizations to even consume seed oils in the form of sesame oil, which have all the same dreaded omega-6s and the PUFAs every internet tough guy likes to fearmonger about. In fact, sesame seed oil consumption in Japan is the largest in the entire world. So even if the Japanese like fish, they absolutely love seed oils. They've been consuming it for centuries longer than Americans, yet they have higher IQs. Joseph, you've been a fool.
What's tricky about getting an idea of which country eats the most DHA is that DHA degrades when you heat it. Lucky for Japan, they eat plenty of raw seafood. A 2022 survey found that the second most common way people ate their fish at home in Japan was raw, as sashimi. Japan also has more than twice as many sushi restaurants than fast food and pizza shops combined.
He's exaggerating the effects of cooking on DHA levels. This study here that looked at different methods of cooking salmon showed no significant significant differences in DHA levels between raw salmon and cooked salmon. We've already shown that countries that consume much more fish than Japan have lower IQs, so even if DHA were slightly reduced by cooking, these countries with lower IQ levels are consuming similar, if not greater amounts of DHA, so this argument doesn't hold up. Also, there are other cultures that eat a lot of raw fish that have significantly lower IQ levels than Japanese people. An example is the Inuit people who eat fish almost exclusively raw and have for many generations, but despite this, their IQ level is only 91, lower than even the United States, a nation where 7% of its population believe that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Japan has a high IQ because they are a highly developed nation that puts a huge emphasis on its education. Being that Joseph lives in Japan, he should really consider utilizing their education system before making another video like this.
Now, there's that third fat that Michael Crawford said was important to brain size that explains why animals like rhinos are so dumb. In their 1-ton body, they have a mere 350-gram brain. That would be like a human having a brain the size of a walnut.
I wish I could think of brilliant plans like that.
Land animals like rhinos barely get any DHA, but their plant-based diet gives them plenty of linoleic acid.
Like I said earlier, rhinos are not dumb animals. The blue whale is an intelligent animal, even though its brain is small proportional to its body too. But even if you assume rhinos are dumb, this argument doesn't make any sense. Elephants are one of the smartest creatures on the planet, and they have a diet that is mostly similar to rhinos, and it's been that way for millions of years. That's why there have been rhino-elephant conflicts in nature, since oftentimes they graze on the same land. So, if rhinos are dumb, which they aren't, then how come elephants aren't dumb too, even though they eat largely the same foods with high linoleic acids? And why are linoleic acids even bad to begin with? Let's go ahead and let what I've learned explain.
Linoleic acid is that third fat. It can compete with DHA for incorporation into the cells. That is, too much linoleic acid will hog up space in the cells so the DHA can't get in.
Did you make this with vegetable oil?
Oh, yes.
Thanks, but I gotta watch what I eat.
These totally new and unnatural vegetable oils that we didn't eat for 99% of human history have tons of this linoleic acid that reduces levels of DHA. But DHA is critical for brain function and even the evolution of the brain. You might have a big bottle of linoleic acid at home, like sunflower oil, soybean oil, corn oil, grapeseed oil, canola oil, and so on. Most restaurants use these seed-based oils to cook with because it's so cheap.
Right, the guide to cooking a perfect steak. Touch of oil in.
Most processed food and prepackaged food has plenty of vegetable oil. Fried foods are of course fried in vegetable oil. Mayonnaise and salad dressing is primarily just vegetable oil. The average person eats these oils every single day. Now, IQ is a little controversial and does depend on many different factors, but lucky for Japan, which allegedly has the highest IQ in the world, they consume about half the vegetable oil of Americans.
So here, Joseph takes his theory one step further and claims not only that people don't consume enough DHA, but that linoleic acid blocks the formation of DHA. This is because the same enzymes that convert linoleic acid to arachidonic acid also convert alpha-linoleic acid into DHA. So he's saying that if you eat a lot of linoleic acid, you'll be tying up the enzymes that should be busy creating DHA. But if you remember way back to the beginning of this video, Joseph said that there were two fats important for brain growth, AA, meaning arachidonic acid, and DHA. He spent most of the video talking about how great DHA is for brain health, but he has completely glossed over AA, arachidonic acid. And actually, as much as DHA is important for brain growth and infant development, arachidonic acid is also essential for brain growth and infant development. So both DHA and arachidonic acid are important for cognitive development. So where does arachidonic acid come from? It is present in meats, but like I showed before, it is synthesized from linoleic acid, which is the omega-6 fatty acid that Joseph demonizes. So if both arachidonic acid and DHA are good for the brain, why would linoleic acid, which creates arachidonic acid, be bad for the brain? Well, it turns out that there are only two essential fatty acids, and they are linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid. They are considered essential fatty acids because they can't be synthesized by the human body. All the other fatty acids, including DHA, arachidonic acid, and many others, can be synthesized from those two essential acids. It turns out that both of these essential fatty acids can be found in plant sources, including seed oils. Canola oil contains both linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid. Yet, Joseph still wants to demonize one of these essential fatty acids, specifically linoleic acid. Fortunately, though, we have a recent review article from just last year that puts the effects of linoleic acid into a greater perspective. Linoleic acid has many benefits that that Joseph never mentions. The data in this table is based on meta-analyses of prospective studies involving hundreds of thousands of subjects. Subjects with high blood levels of linoleic acid had significant reductions in the incidence of cardiovascular disease, strokes, and type 2 diabetes. Another anti-seed oil talking point is that linoleic acid causes inflammation. However, this has been refuted by several studies. In fact, higher intake of linoleic acid is associated with reduced markers of inflammation. The article also reviewed the effects of lowering linoleic acid in the diet on both DHA and another omega-3 fatty acid called eicosapentaenoic acid, also known as EPA. The research showed some increase in EPA with low linoleic acid diets, but no effect on DHA levels. The conclusion is that the effects on overall health from lowering linoleic acid levels are unclear and further research is needed. That's because other research shows that increased linoleic acid has benefits on cell function that could offset any negative effects of linoleic acid.
Was served for lunch at a high school.
Students in Woodbridge, New Jersey say the food is inedible.
Some high school students who are so sick of their school food, they've started a protest movement against it. In 1970, the law changed. Schools could now turn to private, for-profit companies to feed their students.
In American schools, it's common to have plenty of processed food on the menu.
You cut back on everything. Salaries, supplies, the food.
In Japan, school lunches are planned out by a nutritionist, and it's standard to make them fresh from scratch every day.
Okay, so everybody already knows that school lunches in the USA are crap. It's a real big embarrassment for my country. But it's not because of the seed oils. It's because these are all low nutrition processed foods that are high in sugar and low in nutritional value. Processed foods are not the same thing as seed oils. School lunches have the same problems of most processed foods in general. They have too much sugar, too much sodium, and too many calories. If you replace the seed oils in these foods with any other oil, even fish oil, it wouldn't make the food any healthier at all. It would have all the same negative health impacts that American school lunches currently have.
What's alarming is that Michael Crawford found that those animals with high linoleic acid and low DHA had smaller brains. The animals with high DHA and low linoleic acid had bigger brains. He says that this state of high DHA and low linoleic acid is what allows the brains to grow and evolve.
Okay, at this point he's just repeating himself. I already debunked this. There is no correlation between linoleic acid, DHA consumption, and intelligence. DHA does not make our brains evolve. That's not how evolution works. Evolution occurs because of natural selection, not because of diet. Lamarckian evolution is a pseudoscience.
Now, as Nina Teicholz laid out in her book, The Big Fat Surprise, in 1911, the soap maker Procter & Gamble figured out that they could take seeds from cotton, something that no one eats, run those seeds through an industrial process, and make something that looked sort of like lard, a very common cooking fat at the time. They launched a massive marketing campaign, positioning their product as a cleaner, more modern alternative to lard. And by 1916, sales of their crystallized cottonseed product, Crisco, reached 60 million pounds. Various other vegetable oils like corn oil, canola oil, and soybean oil came on the scene, and this is how we went from eating 0 grams of vegetable oil a day in 1865 to 80 grams a day today. That's over a pound of vegetable oils a week. That's around 720 calories from oil a day.
And all of this exactly coincides with the dramatic increase in IQ that started in the 1920s. Now, I'm not claiming that eating seed oils is what caused this increase in IQ levels. However, if seed oils supposedly decrease brain size, then logic would dictate that IQ levels would have dropped dramatically at this point, but instead, the opposite occurred. So who would have thunk it?
Vegetable oils are now a $212 billion industry as of 2022. Further, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans were introduced in 1980 and recommended we swap animal fats like butter and lard for vegetable oils.
Actually, it's earlier than that. The American Heart Association started recommending using polyunsaturated vegetable oils instead of saturated fat way back in the 1960s. We've already shown why that's a good thing, because at the same time that these changes were made, the incidence of heart disease has diminished dramatically. And like I showed in my statin video, which is linked below, there is a direct correlation between the reduction in LDL cholesterol levels and a reduction in the risk of heart disease. So this recommendation by the American Heart Association actually worked and it saved lives.
It makes you wonder if this could be a factor in why the IQ increase in Americans slowed down right around 1980.
This is bullshit data from a bullshit person. Joseph is talking about a decrease in the increase of IQ levels. If you actually look at the data though, you'll see that IQ levels continue to rise until about 2006 and then dropped, which like I explained is probably because of social media brain rot brought about by channels like What I've Learned. There is no correlation between seed oil consumption and any drop in IQ levels, especially since during the 20th century, IQ levels rose despite seed oil consumption going up.
The vegetable oil story just gets worse from here.
It can't get worse than this video, can it?
In 2010, researchers out of Canada were trying to figure out why some women did not have high enough levels of DHA. That is, multiple studies find that babies' brains and intelligence benefit from the mother's DHA supplementation, which would mean that women aren't getting enough DHA in the first place. But the researchers were suspicious that maybe it wasn't just that they weren't eating enough DHA, but something was interfering with the DHA in the women. By analyzing the blood of pregnant women, they found that indeed, those women eating too much linoleic acid had not just lower DHA, but lower levels of the brain-boosting fats AA and EPA. So this also suggests that linoleic acid shoves out DHA and other fats essential for brain function and development. Then, 5 years later, a 2015 study found that, as expected, children with mothers who got too much linoleic acid experienced negative effects to brain development. Just 1 year after that, in 2016, a study on over 4,000 children and their mothers found that higher linoleic acid in the mothers when they were pregnant was associated with more symptoms of autism spectrum disorder when the children were 6 years old. 4 years later, a review article calls for more investigation into how we can protect our brains by reducing how much linoleic acid we eat.
This guy is acting like seed oils only contain omega-6 fatty acids, but this isn't true. In fact, the most widely used seed oil in the world, canola oil, has an excellent balance between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. It's 2 to 1. Now, it's worth mentioning that none of these studies prove that linoleic acid harms the neurological development of unborn children. Maternal nutrition is a very specific situation, though, so it is possible that during pregnancy that these ratios may be more important and women may need to take supplemental omega-3s like flaxseed oil. But even if we assume these omega-3 and 6 ratios are the problem, you can't deduce it was seed oils necessarily. I mean, just look at butter. It has a 6 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, so maybe the problem was that these women weren't listening to fat. Or how about lard, the main fat source found in bacon? It has a whopping 20 to 1 omega-6 omega-3 ratio. That's even worse than soybean oil, which has about a 6 to 1 ratio. So maybe these women were just eating too much bacon. The ratio is much worse than canola oil, which is just a 2 to 1 ratio. Remember, canola oil is the most commonly consumed seed oil in the world, so unless these women were vegan, it's really hard to blame these problems on seed oils. In fact, if pregnant women are interested in balancing their omega-6 and 3 fatty acid intake, they can achieve this by eating more seed oils. I mentioned canola oil already, which is great, but there's also flaxseed oil, which has a 1 to 4 omega-6 to omega-3 profile, so 4 times as much omega-3s as omega-6s. Chia seed oil is also a good choice with a 1 to 3 ratio. Any omega-6 to omega-3 imbalance is not a seed oil problem, especially since some of the best sources of omega-3 in the world come from seed oils, including canola oil, which again is the most commonly consumed seed oil in the world. And also, this stuff just applies to pregnant women anyways. For anyone else, all the data shows that substituting polyunsaturated fat for saturated fat decreases the risk of heart disease. So the benefits greatly outweigh any hypothetical disadvantage, regardless of the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio.
Unfortunately, for children under 9 months of age, there is no infant formula on the market that does not contain vegetable oils.
Vegetable oils are in baby formula precisely because they contain linoleic acid. Linoleic acid is in formula because it's an essential fatty acid, meaning that it can't be synthesized. It has to be part of the diet. Breast milk contains both essential fatty acids. Of the fats found in breast milk, 23 to 28% is linoleic acid and 15 to 17% is alpha-linoleic acid. So if linoleic acid makes up a large percentage of breast milk, why wouldn't infant formula try to duplicate that? Infant formula just mimics the amount of linoleic acid found in breast milk, about 28% of the total fatty acids. So why would Joseph be against this? Is he against breastfeeding? I mean, this man likes to breastfeed from cows, so why would he be against a formula that perfectly replicates the fatty acid content found in breast milk?
All this doesn't mean that you don't need to worry about linoleic acid and DHA after you finish growing your brain. DHA is critical for healthy brain functioning in adults too, no matter your age. Studies have found a link between DHA and everything from irritability, stress, depression, to memory, reaction time, and even aggressiveness. DHA has even a protective effect on the brain in the case of head trauma. And papers have associated higher consumption of linoleic acid with higher rates of depression.
So he makes some broad claims here that low DHA is associated with a bunch of mood disorders, but he doesn't actually give any evidence other than 2 studies right here. What I've learned is being deceptive by citing this first study though, because the study just says that DHA supplements can be helpful in treating brain injury. That's it. No one is arguing that DHA is bad for you, but this study has nothing to do with linoleic acid or seed oils. The second study he quotes is this one right here. This is another survey study with data that was obtained way back in the 1990s. Women filled out questionnaires about their diet, and from this questionnaire, the researchers calculated their supposed intake of linoleic acid and whether that correlated with symptoms of depression. Supposedly, diets higher in oleic acid and linoleic acid were associated with depression. However, like in the other similar study Joseph brought up before, blood levels of oleic and linoleic acid were never measured. This is all very indirect evidence. It's much more likely that these depressed women were just eating more processed junk food, which is what depressed people often do, or they just overeat in general, which will also increase the amount of fatty acids they consume.
But getting back to just how unnatural seed oils are.
Like olives produce oil, and seeds generally do not produce oil, so I don't know what seed oil is.
Let's say you wanted to get oil from corn. You would need 20 ears of corn just to get a single tablespoon of corn oil. For 1 tablespoon of sunflower oil, you need 560 sunflower seeds.
Who gives a shit? It takes a lot of seeds to make seed oil. Okay, why does that matter at all? How many grapes does it take to make wine? Does anyone care? If this is about resources used, then how about we look at the resources involved in making animal fats? Raising animals to produce fats like butter, tallow, and lard is far more inefficient and resource intensive than producing seed oils.
Also, what even is canola? Have you ever eaten a canola seed? Canola oil is the most common cooking oil in the world, but to naturally get a single tablespoon of canola oil, you'd need to eat almost 70,000 canola seeds. In comparison, what about natural fats? For example, if you wanted a tablespoon of oil from sardines, you'd only need about 2 gutted sardines or 2 slices of fatty tuna sashimi.
Well, nobody is going to cook with sardine oil, and since canola oil is lower in saturated fat, which causes heart disease, as well as having a great omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, why not just eat canola oil? Plus, you can cook with it. Joseph is forgetting the reason why people use oils to begin with. It's because we can cook with them. Canola oil is a Chad oil. We should all be using it.
Here's where this gets confusing. We have known for decades that DHA is good for the development of babies' brains, which is why it's been added to infant formula. Evidence suggests that breastfeeding women who have higher levels of DHA have smarter babies.
I already explained why the FDA demands infant formula contain a large amount of linoleic acid. It's because it is essential for neurological development, and it is present in the same amount in breast milk. If the FDA removed linoleic acid from infant formula, it would end up killing babies. So let's not do that, okay?
So if linoleic acid is so bad and shoves out the brain-healthy DHA, why does the FDA require infant formula manufacturers put a large amount of linoleic acid in the formula? Well, for one thing, this whole story arguably starts with the American Heart Association.
So in case it isn't obvious, Joseph is about to promote a conspiracy theory about the AHA being in the pocket of big seed oil, and I'll get to it as he gets to it.
The American Heart Association today recommends that for heart health, we get 5 to 10% of our calories from linoleic acid per day. They don't say 5 to 10% of our calories from vegetable oil. That's 5 to 10% of our calories specifically from linoleic acid. So to break that down, canola oil, for example, is only 20% linoleic acid.
Oh, fantastic! So if you're saying linoleic acid is bad, then obviously we should be eating more canola oil since you just said it's very low in linoleic acid. Brilliant!
So, if your main source of linoleic acid was canola oil, then you would need to eat 1,000 calories of canola oil to hit the target set by the AHA.
Joseph doesn't seem to understand that linoleic acid isn't just in seed oils. It is found in most whole foods, including meats and fish. So when they say 5 to 10% of the calories in our diet should be from linoleic acid, they are not saying you need to get all that from seed oils. Almost everything that has fat in it has linoleic acid as well. Beef, butter, tallow, olive oil, coconut oil, peanut butter, fish, lard, etc., etc., etc. Virtually everything we eat has linoleic acid. We're not getting it all from seed oils, of course, so this was a very smooth-brained take from what I've learned.
Now, the first heart attack was recorded in 1912. This means the AHA says that in order to protect our hearts, we need to eat 5 to 10 times the amount of linoleic acid that we ate when there was so little heart disease that most people didn't know it existed.
And there's a story that I tell in my book that because heart disease was rare until the late 1920s, cardiologist was a relatively small little specialty.
Okay, so here what I've learned is actually implying that no one ever had a heart attack until 1912, and that heart disease was very rare until seed oils came out. He quotes the same bullshit in his other seed oil video, and this is an extreme misinterpretation of the history of heart disease. Heart disease is as old as humanity itself. In fact, atherosclerosis, the major cause of heart attacks, is commonly seen in Egyptian and Peruvian mummies from as long as 4,000 years ago. This study did CAT scans on ancient mummies and found that atherosclerosis was found in 34% of them. So even though Peruvian and Egyptian mummies come from other sides of the world where agriculture and thus diet would have been dramatically different, we still commonly see signs of atherosclerotic plaque in these mummies that are thousands of years old. In fact, the peak age of the mummies with atherosclerosis was just 40 to 49 years old, which would be considered premature atherosclerosis by today's standards. So things were worse back then, even though there were no evil seed oils for internet tough guys and culture warriors to cry about. And that isn't the only anthropological data we have about heart disease. Throughout ancient literature, there have been descriptions of angina pectoris, meaning chest pain from the heart, such as this Arabic poem from the 7th century. This was long before we had the medical tools and equipment to even verify what heart disease or a heart attack was, yet people still commonly reported symptoms of it, enough so that we see it in ancient literature. It wasn't until the Renaissance when the scientists of that era began to make the connection between atherosclerosis and heart disease. For example, Leonardo da Vinci described the blockage of arteries due to atherosclerosis back in the 15th century. Doctors described chest pain arising from the heart and coined the term angina pectoris way back in the 1700s. So even doctors who have been dead for centuries are still infinitely smarter than the fake doctors of today, and they're certainly a hell of a lot smarter than the contrarian, cholesterol-denying social media dipshits like what I've learned. By 1879, pathologists knew for certain that myocardial infarction, otherwise known as a heart attack, was definitely caused by the hardening of the coronary arteries. Even James Herrick, the doctor who wrote the paper in 1912 that What I've Learned quotes in both of his videos, stated that obstruction of a coronary artery was long regarded as a serious accident. It was felt that people with a blocked coronary artery would always immediately die, and he was the first to point out that it was possible to survive a myocardial infarction. So he wasn't claiming that blockages of coronary arteries had just started happening. Sudden death, which is almost always caused by heart disease, has been a major cause of death since the dawn of history, and likely since the dawn of man. It is believed to have caused a quarter of all human deaths. It's killed more people than the Black Plague and World War II. To see just how far back we know sudden cardiac death has been reported, it was first described by the Greek physician Hippocrates in the 4th century BC, but we know it's actually much older than that since there are references to sudden cardiac death as far back as 1500 BC in papyruses from Egypt. Also, like I pointed out in my statin video, before the 20th century, infectious diseases were the most frequent cause of death because there were no antibiotics back then. Besides that, the life expectancy was much shorter in the early part of the 20th century than in the latter part of the 20th century. During the 20th century, the average life expectancy went from ages in the 50s to ages in the 70s. Atherosclerosis is a disease that affects mostly older people, so in reality, many people before the 20th century died before they were old enough to get significant heart disease, so if there's any metric that makes heart disease seem like it was lower in the past, it's artificial, just because heart disease takes a long time to develop, and many times people back then just didn't live long enough to develop it significantly enough to have a heart attack. So the rise of heart disease in the 20th century can be easily explained by the decrease in infectious diseases and by the increase in life expectancy due to the miracle of modern medicine. But what about seed oils? It can't be a coincidence that heart disease has skyrocketed since they became common in the human diet, can it? Well, that's what seed oil haters would want you to believe, but it's simply not true. Since the introduction of seed oils, the incidence of heart disease has actually decreased. So this point that What I've Learned makes in both of his videos, that somehow heart disease didn't exist until the big bad seed oils came along, it's absolute bullshit. And this, in combination with his other lies and health misinformation that runs abundant on his channel, is a good reason as to why What I've Learned is hands down the worst health influencer who has ever existed on the YouTube platform.
Nina Teicholz lays out in her book The Big Fat Surprise that initially, nobody knew about the American Heart Association because it was so small and poorly funded. Then, they got their big break when they met the makers of the hugely popular linoleic acid-rich cottonseed oil product, Crisco. In 1948, the makers of Crisco gave the AHA $1.7 million.
As the American Heart Association's own history book reads, it says, and overnight, millions poured into our coffers. As the Procter & Gamble man, they had a dinner, celebrated, and handed us the check.
The AHA happened to then recommend that we swap animal fats like butter for vegetable oils in 1961.
So I guess the AHA would have folded and there wouldn't be any need for it today if they hadn't received that $1.7 million check almost 80 years ago. Adjusted for inflation, that would be about $22 million today, which really isn't all that much if you think about it. Even with the decline in incidence of heart disease since seed oils were introduced, heart disease is still the biggest killer of the human species. So isn't it all believable that the only reason the AHA exists today is because of that check they got almost 80 years ago? You'd have to be pretty dumb to believe that, I think. The fact that What I've Learned consistently avoids is that substituting polyunsaturated fats for saturated fats lowers blood LDL cholesterol. There's no controversy about that. Lower LDL cholesterol results in a lower rate of death. So all this nonsense about oil brain just completely ignores the fact that seed oils have saved countless lives since the mid-20th century when they were introduced. Cholesterol denialists will dispute this, of course, so if you have any doubts, make sure you check out my cholesterol and statin video, which is linked below.
Going back to why infant formulas have so much linoleic acid, the thing is, they're trying to mimic breast milk, and women's breast milk does have linoleic acid. However, the composition of the breast milk depends on the mother's diet. The more linoleic acid a woman eats, the more ends up in her breast milk. And that's important because modern women, because they eat a ton of vegetable oil, they get a ton of linoleic acid. And that means that their breast milk does not look like it would 100 years ago.
So finally, Joseph admits that infant formula is based on breast milk, but then he claims that the linoleic acid in breast milk is much higher than in the past because women consume more linoleic acid in their diet than they did in the past. In the breast milk study I cited earlier, there were only slight differences in the amounts of linoleic acid in the breast milk of mothers with normal body mass index compared to obese mothers with or without gestational diabetes. So, a woman's natural physiology always tries to preserve the optimal amount of nutrition for a baby's needs in breast milk regardless of the mother's diet. There may be slight variations in the composition of breast milk due to diet, but these changes are minor. What I've learned is implying that even breast milk from modern women is bad for babies. It's not obviously. Also, he has no data on the composition of breast milk from 100 years ago. He's just making up that data.
When you eat vegetable oil, the linoleic acid accumulates and stays in the body. The percentage of this linoleic acid in people's fat cells has nearly doubled, from a bit under 10% in 1960 to around 20% in 2005. So the fat profile of an average American is looking more like a rhino and less like a dolphin's. But 10% is even too high, because by 1955, people were already eating plenty of vegetable oil. So what's a normal linoleic acid concentration?
The next thing I'm going to show you, I searched for 3 years. Do you know what I wanted to know? What was the omega-6 fat in anybody's adipose who was on an ancestral diet?
As Dr. Chris Kenobi discovered, these specific islanders who were eating a diet unadulterated by vegetable oils, the amount of polyunsaturated linoleic acid that they had was only 3.8%. That is 1/5 the amount people have in their fat tissue today.
So what I've learned says that linoleic acid levels in adipose tissue have increased since the 1950s. He also says there are some Pacific Islanders with low linoleic acid levels. There is no evidence that higher linoleic acid levels in the fat has any adverse effects. On the other hand, keep in mind that linoleic acid is an essential fatty acid. It is possible to have levels of it that are too low, and that actually is a real medical syndrome. As you can see from this table, essential fatty acid deficiencies are associated with many ill effects, including hair loss. So if you want to go bald, you should listen to what I've learned and avoid all linoleic acids.
Now, seed oils are definitely worth removing from the diet, but something simple I added to my daily routine to increase my energy levels and overall health was electrolytes.
Brondo the Thirst Mutilator. It's like a monster truck you can pour into your face. It's got electrolytes. What are electrolytes? I don't know, but they're extremely awesome, and Brondo is full of them.
So this was a very, very long video. I think this might be the longest video I've ever done, so I'll keep my conclusion short. If you guys remember my part 2 video on Danny Roddy, I brought up Brandolini's law, also known as the bullshit asymmetry principle. It means that the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than that is needed to produce it. So that's why pseudoscientific people like what I've learned have such a lopsided advantage on social media. There are no journalistic standards or scientific criteria anyone is required to meet when they post stuff online. So people can make any bullshit claim they want and make it sound convincing by cherry-picking research and telling people what they want to hear. That's why Joseph Everett has managed to create one of the largest health-related channels on YouTube, by lying to everyone. People like him have brainwashed the entire world into believing seed oils are bad for you when they're actually good for you. But as someone who remembers seeing how the seed oil hysteria all got started with Sean Croxton's channel way back in 2007, I have to admit, it does feel gratifying knowing that I get to dismantle it scientifically, and I hope it inspires other people to do the same thing. These channels, like What I've Learned, are popular, but that's only because other people let them get away with it. And I kind of understand why, because like I said, debunking bullshit takes far more effort than spewing bullshit, but it's still important that people do it anyways, because the only thing it takes for evil to win is for good people to do nothing. So please, people, stop letting channels like What I've Learned get away with this bullshit. So if you've managed to watch this entire video, thank you so much for your attention, and for those who are wondering why I'm not talking about hair loss content, don't worry, this is just a slight diversion. I will be back to talking about hair loss content in the near future, but in the meantime, I'm going to be playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is the Czech Republic's version of The Witcher 3, so I'm going to be having a lot of fun with that, but I will be back with more hair loss content in the very near future. So thank you so much for watching Hair Loss Witchers. I'll see you all next time. God bless.